All right, I left you with one thing. Left you hanging just a little bit, and so I'm going to just go just a little bit on that. You know what's really weird, guys, ladies, is I bring my iPhone up here to make sure that I'm on time. I'm not reading at anything in that, and all of a sudden I hear my own voice and my podcast is playing on here. Really, really weird. Jonathan, I just heard your voice too. It's much more melodious than my voice. You are the voice of the Rainer on Leadership podcast, so I just heard you too. I talked about the one thing that you need to know, the one thing that if there's a simple takeaway that I would have for you during this time, it would be this one thing. And it's a simple word, not the shortest word in the world, but it's a word that I want you to focus on for just a little bit, and it's the word intentionality. Intentionality. Let me give you this as an example. I was in a church consultation and a coaching situation a couple of weeks ago, and the pastor was sharing with me what was going wrong and what was not taking place. And I said, what is it that you want? What is it that you're seeking? If my engagement with you is successful, what will it look like? And he said that we would be an outreach-minded church, that we'd be a church that the community knows us, a church that wherever we go, people will say, that's a church that's making a difference in this place. And I asked this question, very simple question. Okay, what are you doing to that end? What are you doing to get there? Crickets. And I said to him, I hope in a gracious way, you'll never get there if you don't have intentions on leaving. You'll never get there unless you have intentions on beginning. You'll never get there unless you have intentions on getting from here to there. And that's what I want to do this afternoon, is I want to talk about getting from here to there. And I want to talk about it in the context of the simple act of renewal. This whole thing of revitalization, the whole point of what is taking place in churches across North America specifically, which is our primary research base, what is taking place with these churches that I can share with you church leaders in the context of about 50 minutes of time that might be something you can take back with you if you want to be a church of revitalization. For clarity, a church of revitalization, it might be a church that is declining, that is desiring to see the decline reversed. A church of revitalization may be a church that is growing, that wants to see greater health. A church of revitalization might be a church that has good growth trends, but knows that there's significant numbers of people in the community that are yet to be reached. Revitalization literally means to bring back life, but it may be increasing the life that is already there. So don't immediately dismiss the word revitalization as an unhealthy church that has to become healthy, or a greatly declining church that has to see increase take place. Think of it as better life, healthier. Many years ago when I wrote a book called Breakout Churches, one of the things that we wanted to do, we researched 52,333 churches, big database. And we wanted to find out churches that had turned around, had been in significant decline, but did not change pastors. I don't think it helps very much when a pastor calls on us to help them revitalize or turn around a church, and they ask, what do we do? And I say, well, we need to get rid of you first. That does not help the pastor a whole lot. And so I wanted to find out about churches that had turned around without a change in the person of the pastor who was there. Fascinating study. That was many, many years ago, some 17 to 8 years ago, and we've continued to study this thing of revitalization ever since then. I've been involved in revitalization way back when I was a pastor. You remember I talked about that church in southern Indiana? I affectionately referred to it as the Church of First Merle because Merle was the deacon body. Merle was the worship leader. Merle was the welcome team. Merle was almost everything except for Ruby, who is his wife, who played the piano. It was a church that was dominated really just by one family. But it was a church also that was trying to make a decision. They were trying to make a decision on whether they were going to close the doors, a church that had been around since 1799, whether they were going to close the doors or call me as pastor. And they said after they heard me preach, it was still a very tough call if they wanted to call me as pastor or close the doors. Mary Mulligan wanted to close the doors. She's the first one who died. I don't know if I mentioned that. That's just a little bit of coincidence that is there. After I had been named pastor, and I'm preaching my first sermon as pastor, and I'm there behind the pulpit, and I began to preach. My first sermon as pastor was to preach the Great Commission out of Matthew 28. And so I started reading the text, go therefore, and I stopped. And I heard someone yell at the top of their voice, even though she was a diminutive lady, the matriarch of the church. We called her Granny Smith. She yelled out, "Turn on Jesus!" I had no idea what was going on. So I tried to read text again. And I got to the first word, go. This time with a more forceful voice. Even in the frailty of her body, it reverberated throughout the small sanctuary. She said, "Turn on Jesus." I paused again. I tried to start. This time I opened my mouth, but no words came out. And she stood up and pointed her index finger at me. And she said, "Young man," I was young then, "young man, I told you to turn on Jesus." I was so clueless about what to do. So I just kind of put my hands out like that. All the elders came up and surrounded me. His name was Merle. And Merle whispers something in my ear. And I finally understood. You see, there was a picture behind me of the likeness of Jesus. Let me finish my own story, okay? Y'all just let me finish. And the church had gotten electricity 15 years earlier. It was a major building program to wire the church. And dangling from the likeness of Jesus was an electrical cord. And it had been tradition for 15 years in that church that the preacher would not preach, that he would not read the text until he got the electrical cord, plugged it into the socket, illuminated the picture, and thus turned on Jesus. One of the few times in my ministry I have been successful in turning on Jesus. I actually went back to the church 5 or 10 years after I had been pastor, watched the young seminary pastor go up to the pulpit, and sure enough, he went right over here, got the cord, plugged it in, and turned on Jesus. Sometimes revitalization to us may seem as simple as plugging in the cord. Sometimes it may seem as a complex myriad of activities that you don't begin to get one or the other. And of course, we know it is not either of those situations. I want to take you on a journey with me if I can. I want to take you on a journey of church revitalization. As I indicated in the first session, anywhere from 65 to 90% of churches across America need some level of revitalization, depending upon how you define the need for revitalization. And I want to take you on a simple journey. As you go on this journey, don't let the different points, once again, I'll go through 10 of them, don't let the points obscure the simplicity of this. Don't let 10 different statements overwhelm the senses where you don't see just the one thing which I'll be talking about. I want you to go on this journey with me so that we can see this simple path to revitalization. The first of the path is number one. You heard it earlier, and I call it, once again, a reality wake-up call. A reality wake-up call. In the book of Zechariah, back in chapter 4, you heard the text. The angel of the Lord roused me as one awakened from a sleep. The text is very indicative whether Zechariah was in a literal sleep or in a spiritual slumber. that the angel of the Lord came to him and had to shake him, not just speak to him, but the text said the angel roused me. An indication of a shaking, an indication of physical touch, of like someone who is nodding off. Someone who is nodding off, and you have to push them just a little bit in order to wake them up. I was another church where I was serving as pastor. I was serving in Birmingham, Alabama. And we had a young lady, totally deaf, that eventually from our congregation became Miss America. She became the first deaf Miss America. Her name was Heather Whitestone. And Heather was a lovely, lovely girl. And if you go back to that Miss America pageant, you can see that her talent show was actually dancing to Via Dolorosa. And I was in this very conservative Baptist church of which Heather had become a member. And someone said, we had our Sunday morning service, which was our main service, and we had our Sunday night services because that's the way we've always done it. And we had the Sunday night service, and someone said, this was before she became Miss America. She was Miss Alabama at this time. Heather would like to give her testimony in the Sunday evening service. I said, sure. Even though profoundly deaf, she articulated very well. I knew that she could do fine. She was not only a lovely lady externally, but you could tell that the Spirit of the Lord was just living within her. I said, sure, Heather can do that. I had no idea that her testimony was going to be dancing in a Sunday evening church in a very conservative setting where her clothes exposed more skin than many of the members of our church had even seen at the swimming pool that they attend. So Heather comes out in her not much, and my wife is sitting next to me, and I'm just trying to stay focused because I don't want to see nobody at this time. And I'm trying to stay focused, and my wife, Nellie Jo, does this, like that. And she said, do you see what she's wearing? I said, nothing. Those were terrible words to say at that time. As a little P.S., we had a call deacons meeting at the conclusion of the service for a vote of confidence for me. I won 7-3. It was that bang, that elbow in the side that just kind of, if my wife sees this, and Nellie Jo's a pretty open-minded lady, if my wife sees this, I'm in trouble. It was just kind of that wake-up call. It was that as one is roused from sleep. The angel of the Lord didn't just say, hey, Zechariah. He said, wake up, look. That's where the rebuilding of the house begins in Zechariah 4. As the prophet and priest, Zechariah has this wake-up call. Here is the reality. We don't begin to see our churches revitalized until we know our churches need to be revitalized. Until we're willing to confront reality. Until we're willing to look and see, is there something about our church significantly that we would like God to change? And so the first step in revitalization is a wake-up call. We often, to those that we work with, give them tools to help them see. We give them community studies, demographic studies, psychographic studies. We do church health reports on their churches. that the church members take surveys on. We do emotional intelligence or relational intelligence to help leaders see themselves more clearly in the mirror. Whatever it takes, when we work with the church that has come to us, maybe even not knowing why they're coming to us, one of the first things we do is say, have you really had this wake-up call? Are you really ready to make the changes that are necessary? Jonathan and I were looking at an email that was sent to both of us this morning, and it was from a pastor. Without revealing too much, the pastor had gotten into a revitalization. I just read the email this morning, and he had led the church that had gone from, my numbers may be off a little bit, but a peak of 600 in attendance all the way down to about 110 in attendance. And he came into the church and led it to a wake-up call, a reality check, and the church had reached 400 attendance under his tenure, and he was writing us to let us know that he had been fired as of this past Sunday and exited out of the church without severance until the denomination intervened and gave his family 3 months severance. Reading that reality check, reading the pain that many pastors and church leaders go through, it reminded me again that the wake-up call is not merely a wake-up call for a turnaround, but it's a wake-up call to look around as well, to make certain that we know as we lead change, we're leading it in such a way. Well, one of my favorite definitions of leadership is a leader is a person who is far enough in front of the people that they recognize that person as the leader, but not so far in front that they think that he is the enemy and they shoot him in the rear. This pastor confessed to us that he had gotten so far in front that he had lost the support of significant people. I could go on and on. We get this input. We get this overflow of information again and again. But here's the first thing that I would ask on this simple path to revitalization. Are you ready for that wake-up call? Have you had that wake-up call? You don't change until you know you need to change. Here's the second characteristic on the simple path to revitalization. I alluded to this earlier, but I call it the new learning generation. By the way, these notes will be available. I'll give you the link at the end of this. The new learning generation. I referred to this. If there is a commonality among leaders of churches that are leading revitalization, it is this. They are continuous learners. One of the reasons that several years ago we created churchanswers.com was to have a place of systematic ongoing learning. I actually do a virtual staff meeting with 1,600 subscribers every single month, and we go over a key issue, and they ask questions, as many as we can take. And then they go to a place within the site at churchanswers.com called Church Answers Central. And there they can ask questions 24/7. And it's an amazing thing. You're seeing a question come in, and you see some of our team members answering it. You see me responding. You see the community responding one to another. And there's this just continuous flow of learning going on. One of the greatest blessings I've ever had is to be a part of that community with other pastors and other church leaders, and to see the continuous learning that is taking place. They learn from each other. They learn from us. And quite frankly, they teach us a good bit as well. Sometimes if I cannot go to sleep at night, I'll go to Church Answer Central at the churchanswers.com site, and I'll watch some of the questions that have come in, and I'll just start interacting with some folks. And it's always time-stamped. And so someone will say, Thom, are you really up at 2:30 answering my question? And I'll type in, yes, I am. I couldn't sleep. And that person will say something to the effect of, well, this is just a God thing that you're here right now. I couldn't sleep either. It's an incredible community. But the key thing about Church Answers is that it's an ongoing learning community. The simple act, the simple steps, the simple process of revitalization begins with a wake-up call, but people who have a learning disposition, a learning spirit. And whether it's formal education or it's the informality of churchanswers.com or whether it's some other way, churches that revitalize have continuous learners. So hang on to this. I'm just giving you some descriptions, and then I hope to give you some takeaways as well. Number three is I'm returning back to the one thing. So number 3 is just the one thing. As I mentioned in the first session this morning, church revitalization is taking place when these leaders who are having these wake-up calls, who are continuous learners, begin to focus on one thing to move their church outwardly. And once they see God working through that, they go to the next thing. They go to the next thing. They're not overwhelmed by the complexity of programs and ideas and things that are just pouring out at them. Even though they're part of the learning community, they know that the most successful revitalizations take place when you eat an elephant. And how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And frankly, many of us leaders are guilty of biting off too much at one time. And leaders in revitalized churches are saying, this is the one thing. This is the one thing that we are going to do. In the little book that I think some of you have called Scrappy Church, I mentioned number 4. And number 4 is what I call the outward focus or the outward deluge. The outward deluge. And it is simply this, that one thing. There are a lot of things you can do in the church, but that one thing should be moving your church beyond herself. That one thing should be moving the church beyond herself. I gave the example this morning of the inviteyouone.com, but there are plenty of others that are out there. But the idea that a church revitalization takes place when somebody says, okay, I'm going to do one thing in our community. And this is what we're going to do. Here's a path that we often take with church leaders when they ask us to assist us in this. We say, okay, let's look at the demographics of your community. Let's find out who is there. Let's look at the psychographics, what they're thinking, what their greatest needs, their aspirations are. Let's look at some of those facts, and we give them that information. So do you see something that you might be able to do? One thing to reach beyond yourselves. Then we say, all right, let's do this church health survey. And we survey the people in the church, and we say, what do you people say about evangelism, discipleship, ministry, fellowship, prayer, worship? What are they saying, those primary purposes of the church? What are they saying? Let's look at that. And then if the leader wants to, we'll say, let's look at yourself. Let's do an evaluation of your relational, emotional intelligence and see if there's one thing that we can do there to help you move beyond yourself. But we take all of these tools, we take all these instruments, and we say, what is that one thing? What is that one thing that you as a pastor, as a church leader, as a church staff member, what is that one thing that you can do to move your church beyond herself and into the community? What can you do to make it an outward focus, or as we say in Scrappy Church, an outward deluge, flooding the church, the community with hope, ministry, and promise? What is the outward deluge? Okay, another thing that we see, and again, the idea is to take one of these ideas, not all of them. Another thing that we see in churches that are revitalizing is what I simply call welcome readiness. Welcome readiness. And it's basically get ready for people to show up. And even the smaller churches, over the course of a year, you will have as many as 100 to 150 new guests show up. That's an average of 2 or 3 a week, even in the smaller churches. In the mid-size and larger churches, it could even be in the hundreds. And not only have I talked about, okay, what if we could just get everybody to show up at one time who's a part of this church? What if we could get everybody to come back who visited our church one time? One of the reasons that they come back, and one of the reasons revitalization takes place, is because something happens when they get there. I wrote a little book earlier this year called Becoming a Welcoming Church. And it's the whole idea that we've looked at these churches that have been revitalized, and we said, what have they done with their welcoming ministry? Let me just break this down a little bit. Jonathan and I have talked to thousands of church leaders. We've talked to lots and lots of church members. And when we start asking them the question about their church friendliness, we inevitably get a similar response. We are the friendliest church in town. And you know what? They are to each other. To each other. My pastor is my son. I live in the Nashville area, and one of the decisions, my wife is a Nellie Jo. She's a godly, submissive woman when I listen to her real carefully. And we were at another church in the Nashville area, and my son started this church a little over 2 years ago. And I don't want to just pick on the husbands in here, but can some of you husbands just help me identify with this just a moment? Sometimes when my wife asks a question, it's not a question. It's a statement. And so Nellie Jo said, would you like to go join our son's church? I knew I had to make a call to my pastor. Said, I'm leaving. Because I love that woman. Been married to her for 41 years. And I know that question that's not an interrogative. That is an imperative. It wasn't even a declarative. It was an imperative. It was go ye therefore and do exactly what she says. And so, being the good husband I am, I said, yes, I would like to go there. So I call up my pastor, Mike Glenn, at the time. I said, Mike, I've decided I'm going to go be a part of my son's church. Will you bless me if I leave here? He just kind of laughed. He said, Nellie Jo's making you do this, isn't she? Yes, she is. So we joined my son's church. I've been there about 2 years. One of the leaders in the welcome ministry is a friend of mine by the name of Paul. And we were standing around. They have me on the welcome ministry, which is really... You're supposed to come along on these trips and encourage me and exhort me, not laugh at me, Jonathan. So they have me on the welcoming ministry. And the reason he is laughing is because I told you my dominant spiritual gift was ignorance. I'm lying. That is my secondary spiritual gift. My dominant spiritual gift is introversion. I get drained so easily. I know, talking in public and those kind of things, but small talk and small groups, I just absolutely get drained. And I'll go home with a migraine if I get, it's not that I don't like people, I just don't like being around them. And it just wears me out. And the reason he's laughing is because he's having trouble envisioning me on a welcoming team. I am. Most of the time they put me out in the parking lot to wave to the cars because they know I won't have to talk to them. And if somebody rolls down the window and asks for questions, they'll send someone else to help with the questions. But I'm on the welcome team, and I was not on duty this particular week, but Paul was leading it. And he said, how do you think the welcome team's doing? I said, fair. He said, I think it's doing great. I said, no, it's not. I said, watch this. I said, okay, let's watch the next guests that come in. We're small enough where we know the guests are coming in. I said, watch them. They come into the entrance, and people shake their hand and say, good to see you. I said, watch who they walk by. They walk by all these supposedly friendly members, and no one speaks to them. Other than the perfunctory greet by the greeter who has been given that job description in his or her name. I said, Paul, we think we're friendly. And even though we're only a 2-year-old church, we've got a long way to go. And so churches that are going through revitalization, one thing that you may take back is to truly become a welcoming church. That's why I wrote the little book, Becoming a Welcoming Church. Okay, let me just get practical for a moment. Where are your greeters, whatever you call them, welcome team, hospitality team, whatever you call them? Where are they typically in your church? Name one place. Okay, the worship center, auditorium, sanctuary. Everybody has a different name. Okay, that's what are they doing there? They're handing out the bulletins. Yeah, Hezekiah 4:16. Okay, where else are they? Front door. The obvious entrance. It's not so obvious in most churches, right? Where else? Parking lot. That's where they put me, so I don't have to talk to people. Okay, let me walk a guest with you. A guest drives up. And again, ours is not a large church, so ours would be emblematic of 90% of churches in North America. And somebody's waving to them, there's good signage, and okay, they get past that. If they're first-time guests, they can blink their lights, and we'll put them in a first-time guest spot. Good. That's work. They get out. There's someone else in the parking lot. We're really cool. We have parking lot greeters out there. That's where they put me. They put me out in the front 40, so I don't have to be near the action. But as you get closer to where they actually park, there's someone there. They don't go up to them and scare them to death by opening the door of their cars, but they're there to greet them when they get out. Good. Second level. They come to the obvious front entrance, because we have canopy, and it has the sign that says front entrance. And they come in to that front entrance. And they're greeted again, usually by a couple of other people. Good. They continue to come in, and we have greeters. What do y'all call it? Lobby in your church? Do you call it vestibule? Do you call it narthex? Foyer? Yeah, all those names. I've been in churches that had narthex, vestibules, and foyers. I call it the place out front. And so, and usually there's a place where they can get information. We had welcome team members there. Good. They come to the entrance of the worship center, sanctuary, auditorium. I know we all got different names. And someone is there. Usually they're handing out the bulletins, because the Apostle Paul handed out bulletins when you came to church. And so they're handing out bulletins. And then they sit down. We've interviewed a lot of guests. And they said, they have told us that the only churches that are friendly to them are when people speak to them after they sit down. They're usually the first to sit down, because your church members have been trained to arrive between 5 and 8 minutes late. And so the guests are sitting there, and usually there's no one around them. They've told us they feel awkward and unwanted, because once they sit down, no one is speaking to them. You know how we've tried to solve this problem in our churches? And I've gotten a lot of trouble for this one. We call it the stand and greet time. I'm not going to go off on this one because I've gone off on it too much, but guests overwhelmingly despise the stand and greet time. Usually it is loved by people in the church, if they love it at all. I always go to the restroom during the stand and greet time. Whether I need to go to the restroom during the stand, somewhere, great to see you, love you in the Lord. Yeah, go away. That's just not who I am. But guests overwhelmingly say that it feels artificial, that it does not feel like it's really. They only greet you when someone tells them to stand up and greet you. Well, I'm not going to go there. I've gotten in too much trouble over the years about talking about stand and greet time and how guests are. But here is one of the takeaways. Don't take all of these away. Don't be overwhelmed. Welcome readiness. Revitalized churches at some point work significantly on welcome readiness. Jonathan, I want to make sure I'm telling them, do we have the secret guest at thomrainer.com for free? Okay. Does it have about 12 tools in it? Okay. We've got this free toolkit. Go to thomrainer.com, Thom Rainer, Thomrainer.com. And there's a place that has a toolkit. If you sign up for the toolkit, it'll come to your email, and it has 12 different tools in it. It has a facility evaluation. It has a are you guest ready evaluation. But one of the cool things in there, it has a secret guest survey. And that is a survey that you actually give to a guest and ask him or her to come to your church that they've never been there, and when it's over to complete it, to tell you what they experienced in your church. We used to do this in our church when I was a pastor, and at a 6-month interval, we would have a person who is active in another church but had never been to our church come and tell us what they experienced, and then the next 6 months, we would have someone who was not in church, and they would tell us what they've experienced. Most of the time, that person who had never been to church would end up coming to our church, and many times, they came to know Christ as their Savior. This actually became an evangelistic tool. But we have that tool available for you totally at complimentary of us, thomrainer.com, and go to the toolkit so you can look at some of those, and maybe that's part of what you can do toward revitalizations. Number 1, the wake-up call. Number 2, the learning generation. Number 3, let's do one thing. Now I'm beginning to give you some examples of potential one thing. The outward deluge, the welcome readiness. Number 6. Here's another thing that you might do. Close the back door. Close the back door. Basically, from a symbolic or metaphorical point of view, we have 3 doors in our church. We have the front door. That's people who visit us, who are interested in our church, who come to our website. Our website, by the way, is the first place they always come. If your website, if you click onto your website right now of your church, and with your smartphone, and your service times and your physical address does not show up right when you're looking at it on your smartphone, you're missing guests right now. Those are the 2 things that we call it above the fold. If they cannot see it on their smartphone, when they go to your website, if they cannot see your physical address, and if they cannot see your service times, you're going to miss out on many guests. Significant number of guests. That's just a little tidbit that I'm throwing out there. Okay, but that's the front door. The back door is people leaving the church, either just quitting church altogether, attending less frequently, or perhaps for some reason transferring within the community because something happened at the church where they are and they leave elsewhere mad or otherwise. That's the back door. Side door, I'm not going to get into too much. Side door refers to indirect contacts. It may be that outward deluge where you're in the community talking to someone and you tell them about church and they're not coming to the front door yet, but they're getting information about it, or maybe it's an event and they're finding out about your church. That's the side door. We don't want to get into that. I want to talk about closing the back door. And I'm going to break this down into 3 areas in the time that I have left. And these 3 areas are going to be 7, 8, and 9. But when you close the back door, 3 things should happen. 3 things should happen. This all comes under closing the back door. And these 3 things that happen should take place in some type of new members class, whatever you call it. Entry-level class, 101 class. It is where someone comes into the church to find out about the church and perhaps to even join your church. Churches that do not have these entry-level classes have a huge back door. People that don't get this class on the front end tend to leave the church shortly thereafter. Again, I don't know what you call it. New members class, discovery class, 101 class, but it is a place where prospective members, new members, it is where they come through before they become a part of your local congregation. Now here's what I'm saying. This is just one of those things that you might be able to take back. The one thing. If, and certainly you do, have this entry-level class, this new member class, there are 3 things that it should include. These 3, I'll break them out in numbers 7, 8, and 9. The first thing it should include is information. In other words, they need to find out about the church. They don't want to know what you believe. They want to know who the staff are. They want to know the facility layout. They want to know where the children's area is. They want to know what's the vision, what's the purpose of the church. It's information. Your class needs to communicate information, but don't stop there. If you stop there, they're going to continue to walk out the back door. Not only is there information, but there is expectation. And here's where we miss it in many of our churches. We have dumbed down so much about what it means to be a part of the local church that many people think that it means nothing. It means sit in a chair, sit in a pew, have nothing expected of you. That is not the New Testament church. Read 1 Corinthians 12. Read where it uses the word member of the church. I am a member of the body of Christ. And it talks about, it uses the metaphor that some are hands, some are feet, some are the mouth, some are the eyes. But the point is, everybody who connects with a local congregation should be a contributing member. When we bring people in and expect nothing, that's exactly what we get. We have dumbed down church membership, what it means to be a part of the body of Christ. Sometimes we even say, I don't even believe in church membership. What you're saying is you don't believe in 1 Corinthians 12. Now, I know what many people are saying when they say they don't believe in church membership. They're saying they don't believe in it if it's like country club membership or civic club membership. And quite frankly, in many of our churches, membership is like country club membership. You pay your dues and you get your perks and privileges. And you want people to serve you instead of to serve. So that new member class not only has to have information, but it has to have expectations as well. Thirdly, that entry-level class needs to have assimilation. Information, expectation, assimilation. When someone comes through this class, he or she needs to immediately get involved in a ministry or in a small group or in a Sunday school class. Immediately, they need to be connected to something other than the worship service alone. Immediately. Information, expectation, assimilation. What is the best way as a first step to get a new member involved in the ministries of the church? Put them on the welcome team. They're usually still happy. They haven't gotten to know the church well enough to fight or to get in a clique or a power group. They're smiling. We love the church. What's wrong with you? We love the church. But also, assimilation means getting them involved in a group. Let me do this exercise for just a moment. We don't have a middle aisle, but we're going to pretend like we do have a middle aisle. And Jonathan, as I'm looking to the left of you is the middle. So can you put your hand? No, Jonathan, you do me a favor. Would you move, please? All right. Can y'all see the shiny head? All right. This is the middle. For those of you who are in the middle, I'm going to ask that you be identified. You don't have to move. I wouldn't do that to you. The Lord never has someone to move. But I'm going to just say that you're on this side. So, Jonathan is your marker, okay? Everybody on this side, I'm going to call you the sheep. Okay? Those on my right are the sheep. So, if you're here to here, you are the sheep. Okay? Now, if you're directly behind Jonathan, and you two ladies right behind the banner over there, y'all are separated. One of you's going to go with the sheep, and one of you's going to go the other way. That's right. So all of you on my left, I'm going to call y'all the other sheep. So we have the sheep and the other sheep. Okay. Today is October 18th, I'm going to pretend like we all joined this one church. We're here right now. We all joined this one church on October the 18th, 2013, 5 years ago. I'm going to assume that no one has moved out of town. I'm going to assume that everybody's still physically able to come to church. I'm going to assume that none of you are dead. Stretching it for some of you, but I'm going to assume that. And here's what I want to find out. We all joined the church 5 years ago. Where are you today? 86% of the sheep are still active in the church. 86%. You other sheep, 17% of you are still active in the church. There's only one difference between the sheep and the other sheep. The sheep got involved in a group right away. The other sheep are worship-only attenders. That's it. That's it. Think about your assimilation rate increasing fivefold. That's what happens when you put people, move people, encourage people to be in groups. The assimilation factor increases 5 times. Okay. I'm going down this kind of a checklist. And we're talking about the simple path of revitalization. Don't try to take all of these things and change your church right away. Take one thing that can improve assimilation or can improve the outward focus and see what God will do. Take one thing at a time before you go to the next thing. Okay, I'll wrap it up with this. Your community awaits. Your community awaits. Simply stated, your church's physical address is not an accident. You were put in your community by God at a certain time in a certain place for a very certain reason. You were put there to minister to your community. The people in your church and the people in your community, their addresses are not there by mistakes. God has put you where you are for a reason. There are times to relocate. There are times to go multi-site. Of that, I would not disagree. But as long as God has you where you are, your community is waiting. And it is waiting for you to make a difference. You know what frustrates me, and it may frustrate you as well, is when you start asking church leaders and church members how many people in the community are coming to your church, and their response will be, well, they're just not coming. But they know where we are, and they can get here if they want to. Well, the answer should be, how are we getting to them? How are we ministering to them? What are we doing with them? I mentioned, and I was talking about my son Sam in Bradenton, Florida. He is in a church that has been in a process of revitalization for over 3 years. It's been some bumpy roads, but fruit is beginning to be demonstrated. There were some in that neighborhood community in southwest Florida in the Sarasota-Bradenton area that said, I really don't know if we should be here. We are almost a hub of heroin dealing. We're almost a hub of the opioid crisis right here. I'm so proud of my son because he said, our address is not an accident. If God put us in a community where addiction is pervasive, he has put us here to serve those who are addicted and those who are affected by the addiction. To this day, his church in Bradenton, Florida, is one of the most significant places for foster and adopted children. because so many of these heroin parents die or go to prison. And instead of saying, we got to get out of this filthy neighborhood, they decided that they would become the hands of Christ, the feet of Christ, and the love of Christ, and they would go into the neighborhood. Unless you think my son is just talking a good game. I've talked about 10 grandchildren. Well, as far as I'm concerned, we now have 11th grandchild. For he has brought Dominic into his family. Right now as a foster child, but the way the path is going, will probably become an adopted child. And Dominic will have a home, godly home, a place where he can grow up safe and secure and loved, because there was a church led by a pastor, loved by the members of the church, that were there in the community to make a difference. The simple path of revitalization is this. What one thing can you do to start taking those steps? And then, how can you make a difference in your community? I think we are on the precipice of a revitalization renewal. I think that we are about to see things that we can only point to and say, God did it. And ladies and gentlemen, if I walk away from this in my own introverted way and can just have some sense that someone heard these words, that will go back to their church and not just say I attended a conference, but I heard God speak to me that it's time for me, as a pastor, as a staff member, as a church member, it is time for me to make a difference where God has placed me. Then, and only then, can I say, this trip has been worth my time and your time. May it be so. God bless you.